University of Nairobi. Also, we have Professor Atia Waris. She's a professor for physical law and policy at the University of Nairobi as well. We do have with us Engineer Patrick Abath, chair of the KEPSA Foundation, and Bill Okero, who's a businessman and a politician, former chair of the Senate Finance Committee in the 11th Parliament. And looking on, this is what we were talking about, broadside declarations that are stripping off the tongues of the current CSs, and this is the reality on the ground as you can see it with Tano. And we have Wanjiku questioning all these campaign promises, looking at that tree, which is now dry as a crunch as well. And the laptop has just jumped to also the other editorial cartoon that we have in the Daily Nation today. This is what is happening currently in Meru County, and we've seen this table is broken. That is between the MCAs and the current governor, who is holding on her lap, or carrying on her lap, the husband, who is of course a guitarist, right, has been crooning and belting out some of very heavy political, of course, songs that these MCAs are taking special umbrage with, right? And people are questioning, why do we have Mr. Is it Mbaicha? I can't remember his name as well. But the truce, will it happen? The impeachment is on the table from the MCAs. Will it fly at the end of the day? That's what people are questioning. Gado has drawn this today in the Standard, and it's all about Kinoti and the DPP. And we can see what is happening. Kinoti is a man on the cross, so to speak, right now. He has been redeployed so far. He's not the director of the DCI. And we can see the DPP also now fueling all these things on the ground with that tell-all interview that Sophia Wanuna had on Sunday here on KTN News, that also has drawn a lot of debate so far with the DPP letting it all hang out on how also they've had a slugfest with the DCI. Arrogance, impunity, extrajudicial killings, graft, forgery is what now is on the table. Right? That is the Standard today. But I want just to flip back to where we began this morning, and this is the Standard and the Daily Nation that are carrying the story. Ruto's big gamble in PS's choices. Critical questions are being raised here on the hits, and I wanted just to put this on the table for us as well. Let's begin with the misses. Few communities, regions dominate half of the appointments, while some get none. Misses the gender threshold, with former gender CS Margaret Kobia disappointed. Political loyalists crowd out. Public service officials are more faulted by many. You can see their faces. I know this now will really also pique your interest as well, just to speak. We've had this administration promising that, yes, we'll have 50-50 when we come to power. And the women will be given a 50% of that. We've had the previous regime struggling with the gender question. Also, we had the former CS, that is the former CJ, I should say, David Maraga, drafting a cabinet resolution, a dissolution of parliament because of gender parity. Looking at the same administration of the current administration, carrying on with the same misgivings that we had with the previous government, what would you really say?
It's quite unfortunate, frankly. I think it's really important that we support the Constitution. And when you look at a Constitution, then legislation, regulation and policy, it's always a challenge to get a Constitution to be rolled out, and I see it. But I think it's so important to open the space. And there's been a lot of difficulty in finding, they say, but I think that there are many women across the country who are very capable of filling in these spots. Right. I think the question is the political balances and the dealings behind doors sometimes are taking precedence over the constitutional requirement. And then we have to remind ourselves that the Constitution is the voice of the people. So democracy and representative democracy must reflect the Constitution. I think it's something, if Parliament accepts these positions, makes it complicit to not supporting the gender rule, which is unfortunate. It means the wind is not yet there, and we're not taking responsibility for what the people have asked for.
Yeah. I think I want to jump in here because this is an area that I'm very passionate about. Getting gender balance in an organization is not difficult, especially when you have control over that organization. And you have to declare That's the first thing, that's what you want. Then when you do your recruitment, you say that we will do that recruitment on this basis. And therefore you say during the recruitment, and you instruct your recruitment agency that out of that we require so many, right, within the box, so that we can achieve the balance that we wish. When that happens and they find that the applications have not reached that, they now do headhunting. And they go out and look for the people who are suitable. You're not doing it just for whitewashing, just to make sure that you got the 30%. You go out and look for the capable people who can make that difference. So it has to be purposeful. It's got to be driven with very clear instructions. And I think here we missed an opportunity. We missed an opportunity because we've gone through what I call the right system, whereby you allow the commissions that are set up to do their job. But within the ambit of those commissions, we must make them operate with that expectation and give them the wherewithal to do it. Unfortunately, a lot of these times when people say now we're going to do headhunting, they headhunt and do zero grazing. They headhunt where they can get their people in. Unfortunately, that is the reality. So people are very, very careful to give that freedom to those organizations to go and make that happen. So I think we really have to look at a process whereby we instruct those organizations to do it and do it right. And then supervise this bit of let's headhunt very carefully and get independent people to do that so that you're getting the good balance. And within that, you can also then begin to address the issue of regional balancing, etc., etc. But if you just allow open, you say we are going to do it, recruit in an open and transparent manner, you will find that Patrick Obath won't apply because he is not, I could, but I don't want to be sort of, ridiculed by going through a process that I will, at the end of it, I will be harmed. So I think that process needs to be reviewed.
And also there's the psyche of men versus the psyche of women. Men are used to going out there and applying and getting these things, but there's a lot of actually research studies that talk about the fact that women tend to be less willing to enter into spaces which they don't see as being particularly safe, for example, to work in, to be in, which has not been open to them in the past, And so I think it's important to actually be very deliberate about not just hiring, but then also making sure you create the space there that particular woman also feels secure and safe enough to continue working. Because the other thing that I see across the world for women in leadership, and of course I have been in and out of leadership in different positions, is that if you don't get that support, they segue out very, very quickly because you leave the space that you cannot be effective. And you also know, we're also just like everybody else, trying to deliver and get work done.
But I think it's also fundamental that the way I see the issue, the spirit behind the issue, and I don't like calling it gender, having that mix of men and women, it's the outcome of better productivity. The same in the household. If you actually go to a single, and with all due respect to the single mothers and single father, if you go to a house where you're only one single parent, there are issues. Even in terms of the kids coming up. It's the same you stretch further to the economy. When you have that mix of men and women, and more fundamental, men and women who have the qualifications. And I don't think we are short of that in this country.
No, not at all.
We do.
Yes.
We don't have that.
Yeah.
Because you step just about what? It's an hour flight, Bill, to Kigali?
Yes.
An hour flight. You find that mix is there already. It's a big deal. There are people with the qualification there. But the moment I see the bar from a different perspective, and also as Kenyans, and I think it's very important as Kenyans, and Moi said this very clearly, and I think we tend to forget it. Moi said, in politics, it's when you're trying to woo a lady, you can promise her heaven. Lakini akiingia kwa nyumba, it's a different ballgame. The narrative there is sweet, as we campaign. But the reality is different.
It's different.
But I think, as you mentioned last week about the soul, remember what you read about the soul?
Yeah.
Today you didn't give us the soul or something like that.
Today I didn't give you a pick-me-up.
Yes, but that soul as the head of the state,
Yes.
that promise should come out and see that balance. That balance to me is very important, and probably it can be related to the productivity in that. Look at the COVID time. The regimes which were headed by the ladies, Norway, New Zealand, Taiwan, they managed so well. Yeah, and I think that's a mix we are looking when you look at.
Indeed, but I'm greatly shy maybe to hold with the view of Professor Ate, is what you're telling us that women are their own tripping wire, that they encumber themselves because of the fact that they're women. They can't, because of that particular safe space which is not really there.
No, it's the narrative that you're using. It's we all grew up in a society over the past, say, 100 years or so. We've been operating in societies, especially in this part of the world, where women were not part of formal leadership. So women were in informal leadership spaces. It's not that they were not there. Then you have a situation now where you're trying to bring in women into formal leadership spaces, right, across the country. But in reality, the structure and the system that is set up was set up during a point in time where leadership was purely one gender, right? So there isn't that allowance or the change or the shift in even styles. Women, they say, lead differently very often from how men lead, for example. There's a different way they deal with things. Is there that space for that? And I think that is what we need as a very conscious effort. Don't expect that the only thing you want to do is pick up a woman and put her at the head of, I don't know, the Ministry of Education, nothing personal for the current one, and then expect everything to just be the same. Because that person is going to first already come with their individual style, whoever they are, right? So there's already that kind of change. But then there's gendered issues around it. There's how a woman would behave in those spaces. One example that somebody gave me, which I always remember, it was actually a colleague at the law school, and she once said to me, she said, you know, there's no lights on the corridor at night. And for those who don't work late, we never noticed. But for the person who decides they want to work late and there's no lights in the corridor or no lights going to the car park, there is a different reaction for a woman to a dark space than for a man who would probably just walk straight through and not think twice about it. But it's about those nuanced differences in how we are and how we operate, and therefore how we deal. And then if we throw in the fact that with this wonderful tapestry of multi-ethnic, multi-racial population in the country, then you also know that there's cultural nuances to how women are treated in different ethnicities and in different races. So even that has to be, we have to be cognizant of it. And so how do you make sure that we are cognizant so that not only somebody from a minority, like I noticed there weren't too many minorities who applied in the list, but how do you make sure that minorities feel like they can apply? And minorities for me include marginalized, which include gender, which include people of disability. And it's that conversation. It's a bigger discrimination conversation that has been inbuilt. It's this whole structural discrimination work that I've been looking at. Is how do we make sure that that is unpacked as well? Because part of the limitation in this whole space is you look at the numbers who are applying, and you know that 55% plus are women. So this should be reflected. Numbers applying, numbers selected, numbers shortlisted, numbers actually in position. And if we're not getting there yet, then what are we doing wrong in that process?
Yeah, politically, what are we doing wrong, Bill Okero, on that? Because even from you 11th Parliament as well, this gender was still a problem. And what does it portend right now that we still have it? We had the civil society moving to court to challenge even the constitutionality of the CSS as well. We seem to be breaking away from the promises that we've made on the ground right now.
The Constitution, both in letter and spirit, it talks about progressively achieving that gender balance. Particularly in the elective or in the representation in Parliament and so forth. But it does appreciate that in many of the issues, including appointments to state offices, that recognition is there, and it's provided for in letter, actually, in Constitution, that we must have representation of women, minorities, and marginalized groups, and all of. And I think what we are seeing is that progressively this has been addressed. That in all the appointments, it may not be 50-50, but even in this appointment of the cabinet and the principal secretaries, you will find at least the women representation is not less than a third. It's well over a third, actually. But so in my view, I think from 2010, when this constitution came in, there has been a progressive increase in the number of women in both in representation in parliament, in state offices, and I think this has even been taken care of, even legislation in terms of, for example, providing for contracts and so forth, 1/3 for women and youth and so forth. So I think it's there, but in politics, promising I'll put 1/2 of my cabinet this and 1/2 of my cabinet this. It's not only about women. Promises have been made to so many people, communities, to regions, to institutions. But in politics, when you're out there campaigning, it's a different ballgame. When you come in, it's the reality now. It's different. So I don't think you will actually go by.
We shouldn't be taking this thing seriously.
Pledges made in campaigns should not really be considered when we are looking at how the government works.
But that is pure lying through your teeth. Because if you make these promises in a different jurisdiction, we'll hold you really accountable for what you didn't make. Because I cast my vote.
The only action you can take,
on the promises
even if it's in the
given.
US or in the UK, the only action you can take is to vote them out in the next election. But you cannot say, you made a pledge during my campaign, your campaign said do ABCD, and you didn't do it, and therefore we're going to court or we're going to do this. But what happens even in the West is they get punished for not having lived up to their pledge as a party and as a team that came to power, or as a prime minister.
But being voted out.
Yeah. And that's why we have those elections.
I take scruples with the fact that, the Constitution has it that this has to be progressively realized. Because this is where even politicians will be hanging on for the longest time, donkey years, that we're still not realizing this is like a mirage. Do we even have a sunset clause on it that we know at least this realization will be realized? Like Director General of Vision 2030 here. Vision 2030 here, since we were being told in 2000, it seems far away in 2030. But now, we're only, how many?
No, we're just 7 years
shy of 2030.
No.
Do we have a sunset clause?
The Constitution did not leave this thing open-ended. This is why Justice Magara, Supreme Court, ordered that Parliament be dissolved if they do not achieve that. So the law is very clear. It's not open-ended. You must achieve this within a certain time frame. If you don't, Parliament stands dissolved. And this, the Chief Justice, Supreme Court, pronounced itself on that. But the President was not willing to play his part. And so Parliament continued. But the law is very clear. I mean, if you don't have that balance, you are not legally constituted as far as the Constitution is concerned. And I think, but you see, the question is, that's not the only thing in the Constitution of Kenya that is being ignored. There are many things in the Constitution that are being ignored. So that's what happened. So I don't think anything would happen. But at least I think the consolation is that something, they're not being left out entirely. It used to be more than 10 years ago before this new Constitution. Now, at least women are being included.
I think it's so dangerous on a bigger picture, because it means that you have the Constitution in place, you have the political party of the day coming in, you have things being rolled out that may be in contravention, and then the next regime that comes in will be able to then use the Constitution to maybe even reverse good things from a previous regime because of doing that. And that also happens in other countries in the world. When we were talking earlier about this change from one regime to another that keeps happening. And so if you start doing things in contravention to a constitution and legislation, then what happens is you've just given them the entry point to reverse things. And it's happening across the world now because of that. So maybe it's time to do a bit of reflection amongst our political spaces, because I'm going to say this on behalf of the 55% of Kenyan women, of which I am one. This needs to be realized. And if people are listening who are in leadership, please do this. like as soon as possible.
As soon as, we can flip
Like
it.
yesterday,
I think that once the Constitution, the way it was crafted, created an intent, the problem was that the intent was created without putting in the process. Now, if you have a parliament that is elected in a free and fair manner, it will not make that happen. It will take a long time before that then goes on. So should we have changed that parliament will consist of 330, of which 110 will be elected this way, and the other 220 will be elected in a different way, right? What is the mechanism that will ensure it happens, right? I don't know politically how it can happen, but I think that the fact that there wasn't a mechanism put in place to ensure that it happens, apart from eventually getting there, is an issue. And the issue of shutting down parliament is to force them to create the mechanism. Yeah? But how?
You see, where the challenge is even the drafting of the Constitution, this was a challenge. Because this is about representation. It's about an election. So people go for election, men and women. And for some reason, more men get elected. Even if the equivalent number of women who are contesting. So the thing is, then the Constitution went ahead and said, okay, let us reserve specific seats in every county for women, which they did, 47 county women, just to address as a start. But subsequently, then, women must be elected on the other, constituency seats. But if they don't, then the Constitution said, okay, then you must provide. And that's where now the issue is. If you provide, then it can only be through nomination. Exactly. And the issue of nomination was, so then how many women would you add through nomination? And so that's why the issue was, do we nominate an extra 100 women? And what would the effect of that be in terms of the budget, in terms of the, and so this is where the argument is that it's a very difficult thing to do without looking at all the considerations. Of course, it's happening in the county assemblies. County assemblies, the Constitution provided for, and so the difference to address that gender balance is to put in women nominated. So they just calculate for every 3 positions you put 1 woman. Yeah. And so they have always a certain... I have an unpopular suggestion. But for the parliament, that the issue is, adding an extra 100, or how do you address... So, and I think, so these are the challenges. It's not a very easy thing. They've come up with, remember, in parliament with so many different, and each of the alternatives and bills that members came up with did not fly with, it might not fly with you, but not with others. So that's the challenge. But I think it's important to appreciate that progressively, even this year, you've seen the increase in the number of women in governors' election, in National Assembly elections, in the Senate elections. All of them, they're increasing. And I think so the thing is on the Kenyan population, really, looking at that. So if the voters feel that women can provide better leadership than men, then ultimately they will. I see that balance.
But that's... As an economist, I would say it's increasing, but at a decreasing rate. It seems to be faster.
So reducing balance. Oh my God.
You cast your ballot. Do you cast for a woman at your constituency or a man?
But no, but this is a bad direction to go in. So I have an unpopular solution.
Which is this?
If you voted in a man this time, next time around the constituency is only given female candidates to choose from. Why not? I told you it would be unpopular.
Yeah.
But on a serious basis.
But you are the one who say the women, they are not willing themselves to give out for this particular position. So what will really stimulate them and prompt them to take it?
Don't spin the narrative. That's the word. Look,
he's spinning so much for you.
Yeah, he's spinning against the 55% of Kenyan women. I can tell the women to stop watching your show at this point in time. No, but look, you have a 100+ years of spaces where women have never existed. Now we are creating the spaces where women can now be present. But it doesn't mean that all women are going to automatically see it as a space unless you now have those conversations with women. Now, the next generation are much more open. But people in my generation, I joined university when there wasn't affirmative action. It was 20 girls in my class and 100 boys. That was us trying to get in on an equal playing field. That was the reality.
And it has a narrative behind it.
Yes,
Okay.
and so
From
we
the
have to.
household.
Yes, and then we have to work with it. But you know, we can, if we add more people from a fiscal perspective, we're going to increase the bill. We cannot afford to increase the bill. We have 9 more PSs. We were just talking about it during the break.
Indeed.
How much is that going to cost, right? Those are the mathematics around it. But if we are serious about affirmative action and we are serious about taking it forward, then we have to make sure it happens. So what does make sure mean? Now, we've tried these different things. It's now 10 years later. We should have rolled out legislation attached to the Constitution, specifically allowing us to roll it out, because that's what normally happens. The Constitution has the broad principles, legislation embeds it. We have not done that. So that's why I said, unpopular suggestion. It means he'll be out of parliament for 5 years, or he goes to a different constituency and tries to get in on that side. Okay,
Ival, you know,
but we are not increasing
frankly,
the bill.
You can't force representation on people. It has not happened in the West, which has been agitating for gender for centuries. You go to UK, you go to US, you go to any of those countries, the number of women's representation in parliament isn't any different significantly than what it is in Kenya. So I think what is important about affirmative action, clearly the Constitution did provide affirmative. That's why the 47 women seats were specifically created in every constituency. That's why 16 women slots were provided in the Senate, specifically as affirmative action. But in regards to the others now, the opportunity has been given to the women to contest and Kenyans to vote for women. But I think it's not going to be very easy to legislate and insist one way or the other that you must have half of your representations in parliament to be women. By law, it's not going to be a very easy thing. But apart from not being easy, I don't think it's also necessarily it goes with the concept of democracy and about elections and and all representation and all that. But more importantly, madam, look at it in another way. We have had women in representation and in power now in the last 2 decades significantly. But if you look at if you look at the way those women have ended up being elites, they are not doing much for the women of the country, I'm telling you. They are in parliament, but if you go and do a research on what those women in parliament are doing in terms of helping the cause of women in this country, the only time you see them, for example, in the street is when another of their colleagues is affected, not when an ordinary woman is bashed somewhere or women are starving. You don't see them. They're not really, we have not seen any significant change in terms of women addressing, those women in power, addressing the concerns of their women in the basic necessities of life in this country. And still women, more than 50% of our women in this country still have problems of getting clean water. They still have problems in medical. They still have problems in food. But that's not the main concern. The concern has been on other things. So really, the impact has not also been felt. This is why, in terms of the election, then you find Kenyans are not electing the women more than the men. If there was an impact, I'm telling you, you would see in the election men being thrashed at the polls.
Indeed.
This is why I talk about the structural discrimination in the system. So I did a piece of research on political party campaign financing. An inadvertent conclusion I came to, which was not in my research because it wasn't part of what I was looking at, was I discovered that political parties in this country give more money to their male candidates than to their female candidates. They give better spots on TV to their male candidates rather than their female candidates. If you drove through this country during elections, the main turnoffs of the super highways going out into the villages, the big poster was a male candidate. So, I mean, this is what I call structural discrimination. It's things that we do automatically. But then look at his measure of success. His measure of success is that if you're a woman, you should be campaigning for female-related issues. We should see change in issues around women. But that isn't what happens.
That's the thing I don't agree with.
It's a false narrative.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, a woman could be focusing on children. I love education issues. I mean, I shouldn't be forced, because I'm a woman, to constantly improve women's lives. But I don't see men improving women's lives either. So maybe we need men to be campaigning for women. You know, I mean, these are now the nuances of it, but it's part of the preconceptions we have as to what those roles are fulfilling.
We've had MCAs seeking for allowances for their paramours.
Parliament are seeking for all sorts of things. Let's not pick on women.
But I think to take...
And you see, even here, you are 4 of you,
I
and I am 1.
I knew it.
Even your cameramen are male. Sorry, gentlemen.
No,
Yes.
I think I want to take this point further. If you have a woman within a leadership position, the person who is running that leadership position has to create the environment that allows them to deliver. But also not just create the environment, but also give that, what do you call it, guidance, strategic direction, and everything else. Right? Because to operate in a particular environment, like in politics, they're the people who know politics, good, and they know how to make politics work. Now, I may choose to go into politics and become a parliamentarian, but to understand the nuances of how that works, there are people who are good at it. I'll take the case of my late mother. She was the equivalent of an MCA for a long time. And the only reason she survived, right, she didn't have the money. But at that level, when they were ward representatives or whatever it is, councillors, as it were, she knew that the system of government and expenditure in government worked in a particular manner. So she had all her women groups. And she used to go to the provincial headquarters and talk to the treasury people there and find out where's the money that has not been spent across the whole province. And she says, I've got these things which can allow you to spend money before the end of the financial year. Because if a province doesn't spend their money, next time people are going to question why they're asking for more. And these people were very happy when they were given projects that were ready. And she took that money, and they worked and sort of transferred that money, and she was able to give it to the women's group, and the women's group grew. And she would tell the people from the province, come and see what your money did. And she became a darling for the people in the provincial headquarters. When they had excess money, they said, Councillor Diambo, please come. Have you got projects? So, but she learned that from the people in the system. So I think when you have people coming in, and this is just, I'm talking about women in this case, when they come in a place where they have not, there's not many of them who have got that experience, the leadership there has to make sure that they're actually being looked after properly and guided and made to succeed. And then what Bill is saying, so long as they can show success, right, then more will come through.
Thank you.
But the few that are there have to be really given the opportunity to actually succeed.
Thank you.
You use a very strong word, structural. A very strong word. Even in economics, when you talk structural changes, it's like the Great Depression, the COVID, the whole narrative change. We have to address that structural problem we have.
Yeah.
And it's not easy,
Thank
but
you.
it can be done.
It can be done. I just want us to conclude that discussion on the gender parity issue. But on the flip side, I'll come to the private sector as well. And we've always been, for the longest time, quoting the Kenya Institute of Management's report on board inclusivity and representation as well. We're not faring better even in the private sector, you as a businessman as well. And there is the issue of tokenism and the golden skirt effect, that we just want to let women in, even in the boardrooms. Then they'll be serving mandazi and chai to the chairpersons, and taking notes or the minutes of boardroom meetings at the end of the day. So you could address that.
He's a different debate today.
Oh my God.
Debal, I thought I was speaking for you. Debal, I think you are talking about the year 1980.
Yeah.
Not the year 2022.
No, but this is a report in around what? I haven't seen any
The
recent
KTN
report. That is
report
2018.
was almost 3 years ago, right? And it I don't know how far they went. Look at boards now.
Yeah.
Especially look at the publicly listed companies, right? Where there's queries, and see the distribution in the boards. A lot of organizations, right? Right now, if you look at them, they are not at 30% yet, but the change, the rate of change is much higher.
It's increasing at an increasing rate.
It's almost an exponential change,
Not reducing,
right?
no.
That the number of women getting into leadership positions is much, much higher. And this was not because of now, but because affirmative action started in the 2000s and up to about 2010, 2015 and thereabouts. A lot of talk then was about affirmative action. And that affirmative action is beginning to yield the fruits now, right? And you're finding that within the companies and the people who are growing in the companies, we intentionally started recruiting more women into the companies, which then led to more women in management positions, and now you're getting more women getting into boards, right? It started at the base. You grew the volume, and therefore it will trickle up over time.
Yes.
And right now, I think if somebody went out today and did a research and looked at most of the boards in the country, you will find that the change in the number of women between, say, 2015 and now has probably increased 4- or 5-fold, maybe even more.
Thank you.
Right? So that narrative in the private sector where there is control and you can do it, I think is positive. Yeah. But where you've got restrictions, then you have issues.
Right.
But we have pockets of spaces. We have faith-based pockets. We have some ethnicities that are still struggling with those issues. And I think that's now where we are coming into the more structural issues, is trying to get those communities to think differently. And I don't have to go so far away. At the University of Nairobi, we are 3 female law professors. We are, how many years after independence? We are 3 female law professors. Those are horrible statistics to be having in a country that is at this age. So, and that is my personal journey,
But the grid is tougher even at the University of Nairobi for you to be a professor. It's much easier for you to go outside and become a professor.
Absolutely. There's all of those dynamics as well. Yes.
No, but I know as much as affirmative action is important, Diva loves that topic all the time. But
you're not giving up your
merit. At the end of the day, is important. Look at the developed country. Even what he's saying, go and check the US. Maximum it has ever been 28, 30. It has not even reached 30%. The number of women on boards in the US, in corporate boards, it has never reached 30. And this is after a lot of, it hasn't. And they have been there for centuries. Wall Street, we are a young country. We just started. Companies are, But I think, but in the case of in some institutions, even you would not be happy, Prof, if young lady just got recruited today and she just gets pushed because of affirmative and made. You want her to go through merit, and I think
but there are two different conversations.
That's what is important.
Yeah.
So for me, there's 2 conversations. One is the benchmarking. I have a problem with us benchmarking with other countries that are failing at those issues. So if another country is not able to hit the 50% mark, I don't think we should use their narrative to say we can't do it either. I don't think it's a good direction. I think we should look at countries that are achieving it and ask ourselves, how do we go in that direction? So I think, but also what are the nuances of our country?
Thank you.
But for, as far as qualifications are concerned, that's the structural discrimination. Because women were never getting into universities. When my mother was studying, you had to be either a nurse, a secretary, or a teacher. That was it. Those were the 3 professions you got a chance to work at if you wanted to. So now look at where we've come. And I agree we've made huge steps forward. But that's what I mean. Like, people's minds have been limited. Now we are opening it up.
The university where you and I am, it's very clear. If you want to move from an assistant lecturer, and you do a check for yourself. And you ask, have I published as required?
Yes.
If it's not, don't apply.
Yes.
And at 3, it's 2.
Yeah.
Now, and there's a book, actually, there's a book by a lady from Nigeria. She's called Chinyere Omona, Women Vote in Africa. Very progressive. I think I agree with what Patrick is saying. However, you have to distinguish here. If you look at purely public institutions, like the universe where we are, it's a different one. But I have a company which is really quoted. They are moving towards that. In fact, they have been progressive bringing ladies into it.
Thank you. Right.
But not serving tea. Amen.
So we'll disagree. Yes. That was really not okay.
No, this is a report that I just read. I think from those Nordic countries as well, when they're talking about those.
I can offer you sugar.
The golden scat effect as well. Now, there is this new development from KRA, and I think also Bilo wrote quite extensively in the Standard yesterday. And on page 25 of the Standard today, KRA staff agents to wear body cameras to arrest corruption, right? Aside from the drones that will be hovering over your premises, also KRA staffers will be wearing cams to arrest corruption. So there could be some candid cameras. Maybe, you know, those hidden cameras, it could be your pen, your button as well. The taxman has invited bids for supply of cameras to be worn on staff clothes while on duty. Moves comes against the backdrop of increased pressure from the tax agency to double revenue collection by 2027. Now, I want just to read also what Bill Okero wrote yesterday, that this is why Ruto's plan to unleash taxman on struggling economy will not work. So talk about drones and cameras and all that jazz. He says, I just want to pick up, you say here below that a cardinal rule during a recession, where everyone is facing recession right now, is not to raise taxes, since many individuals and businesses are suffering. Employers struggle to keep their businesses in operation and pay their employees. Individuals are concerned about loss of income and paying their bills as the country records the highest joblessness in the region. The cost of living has skyrocketed and a majority of Kenyans can barely afford food. When the economy is struggling, you cut taxes. When it's booming, you raise them. That is a basic Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics. Let me just get my notebook, so because there's a bit of learning right now. Keynesian economics. You can elaborate more on that, Bilo?
You see what I mean? Gender, back on it.
Then we come to the politics. So we start from the academia, then the private sector, yeah, and then we finalize with the politicians.
Yes, so that he can spin the narrative.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that I think he meant you. So go ahead.
No, please.
But I think the question here, perhaps even going beyond Keynesian, is really, it really shaped the whole idea of how we manage economy. I think it's one of the key Nobel Prizes winners in economics, Keynesian economics. And I think the issue here to look at is ask ourselves fundamentally. And I saw the picture there. I hope the picture didn't come from Bill, where he has written an article, there were two Huro Baruz's sugar canes. It's probably the newspaper which brought him that. Why do people, what's this in us which makes us not pay taxes? I think that's a fundamental thing we need to address. Because there are countries who are charging more in terms of taxation in this world. But why don't we like paying taxes? One, taxation, from my point of view, is to benefit me do my job or my business better. If it's not happening, I'm going to withdraw paying those taxes. I want to have better roads. I want to have medical services. I want to have good education. And that is all about putting cameras here and there or whatever. And I'm sorry to say, I think at times we behave like a lovable kind of banana republic. How putting cameras enhance tax collection? And we have said in this forum before.
To curb corruption.
You have said this before. Kenya Revenue Authority has more bigger responsibility than just collecting taxes. Even providing advisory. Why is my business collapsing? How can we come and be partners so you can produce more and you pay more taxes? I think the key thing the Kenyan is asking on that street, even that informal sector we're talking about, the Mituba, who will do anything not to pay the taxes. If we can demonstrate that this taxation is really coming back to enhance your business, I'll pay taxes. Unless we go to that, putting cameras And God forbid these beautiful girls here, even when they go to the restroom or whatever, the camera is still on, you know.
No, it can be, I think there's a way it can be regulated. There's
Can be regulated.
Yes.
But I'll be one monitoring you with that camera.
I don't think so. That will be
But
stretching it.
outside that, in terms of, I think we need to be more serious in terms of collecting taxes. It's not just tax collection, just tax collection. Let's also see the benefits out of it. And people will pay. People will go for it.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, there is a good proportion in this country who pay taxes. Just go for those ones who can. And I tell you that person not paying the taxes is not my sister here, it's not Patrick, it's not Mweshmiwa. It's a small business they're doing. It's you and I. And you know the people we have seen who are not paying taxes.
Right, we'll come
How
to
do you have a tax to 1B accumulating? 1B. And each year, you're supposed to clear taxes. Are we sleeping on the job as Kenya Revenue Authority? Or we wait, okay, Dubai is not paying, so let's wait until we hit him hard.
I think maybe they normally hack back to when you registered for your company and have you been submitting that. So it's an accumulation unbeknownst to you, then they slap you with 1B to surprise you. That's shock and awe that really people want to...
But we need to be careful, as Bill was saying there.
Yes.
Right now we are trying to reinforce the people against food. So if you are going to kick in,
thank you.
You want to get a little from me.
Professor Atia, then how does this, augur well with the fiscal consolidation path that the country is really trying to streamline as well right now, as Bill is putting it? Even the unionists are saying, hey, if you want to increase that NSSF by 6%, at least also we should have parity with our salary increments. It should be adjusted, right, so that we are at par, so that we can afford also to give that 6%.
So two things. First, when I saw this, I said to myself, this is a sign of a lack of trust. And I think it's a very important message. It means that the government is aware that we don't trust this entity, and that this is what the action he's going to take as the current government to try and rebuild our trust in this entity. But it's also a very harsh solution. I don't know if there is an alternative at this point in time, but it's a real signal. And on a slightly lighter note, but again, why is it a picture of 3 women? You know, I mean, even the choices of where you spin the narrative on gender is so important to everybody. But you see what I mean? We're talking about lack of trust and wearing body cameras, and look whose bodies are there. You know what I mean, right? So it's even that whole
also
picture.
For the photojournalists, they'll say, we don't want to have surangumu. We want to...
But look at when they choose it, right? Look at, these are so important. I mean, this is a media house that reaches the entire country, It's important to know what message we are sending, and we have to be so deliberate. But when I heard that they were going to roll out inflation-pegged solutions, that really worried me, because it meant that government is now aware that inflation is so important an issue that they're going to start pegging their financial decisions partially on inflation issues. But that means they are passing the inflation burden to the society. But the entity that is supposed to be in control of the entire system plus inflation is the government. So it's like a shift of that responsibility. And what does that mean? What is that signal? That the government doesn't want to lose out its purchasing power, but now the population is going to lose out more purchasing power. That is the message I see when you do inflation-pegged decision-making. And I think I understand it. I hear what is being done. Inflation pegging becomes very important when we have to pay off debts, for example, because that means that the amount being collected can keep up with the dollar rate. And we are paying off our foreign debt, right? So it's always we're paying off debt in a currency other than our own. So that is why the inflation-pegged payments allow the government to have stability in its collections for that purpose, the external payments. But there are also other solutions, getting moratoriums on debt, getting waivers, and those are conversations happening around the world anyway right now. But that pressure that we're putting on the pockets, and I've said this previously, I think next year is going to be much tougher anyway for all of us. This is going to make it much, much harder. And even yesterday I was talking about the fact that the first level of taxation, the 10% tax bracket, is at about 12,000 shillings. It's about $3 a day. I mean, absolute poverty is like $1.25, $2 a day. So these are people just above. And then you have the conversation about tax base and widening the tax base. And you can already see the fear, and then you see this, and then you see lack of trust. You know, these are not good signals to be sending to populate a population where we have so much unemployment right now, and so much poverty, and we now have a drought. I mean, we have not even talked about that. Yeah, it's a child a day, a child a minute in some parts of the Horn right now. You know, and that is it. I mean, even if they survive, some of these children are going to be stunted. They're not going to be, like, if I use this dry economic fiscal terms, these are not going to be economically productive people because of the kind of trials and tribulations they're going through in their early years, because the first 5 years of lack of nutrition can destroy an entire generation. So we have to focus on food. We have to focus on water. We have to focus on survival of the next generation.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, Patrick?
No, this issue of body cams, I think, is a big joke.
It's a big joke.
And I'll tell you why.
Body cams and drones.
I'll tell you why. Let's just go back to the registrar of companies. They went digital, right, to try and remove all the issues that were happening there, that people had to pay papers to move. It didn't solve the problem, because somebody still had to press a button on the computer for that thing to move from one office to the other, or one section of the system to the other. So what will happen? The guy will say, let's meet later for a coffee. And then he tells you what you have to do and you pay. Then the day goes back to the office and they press the button. So even digital, whatever it is, did not get away the corruption that is there. So body cams, yes. I'm not going to wear a body cam when I meet you outside and I tell you, fine, we've got to do something about your tax. The body cam is not going to be there when I meet you and I'm buying Isli or in Cunningham or whatever. It's not going to happen. So this is a great idea. It is normally works for police when you've got instant things and you want to record. Yeah? But I'm not going to sort of make deals when I'm wearing this thing on my body. It's I'm not that foolish. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I will trap the other person.
But if I have somebody, if I have the Patrick Obath on the other side, who is going to offer me a deal, and I am a customs officer of a KRA officer of integrity. That's the key thing. I'm an officer of integrity. Then I will wear that to go and get rid of corruption. Yeah? But to tell me that during the course of my work I've got to wear that thing, those guys won't go out of the office.
But also
they'll find other things to do, and that body cam will record all those
or you
things.
can make it malfunction.
I was going to say, do you remember Alcoblo?
Yeah.
So like it was a game.
What happened to alcohol?
But in terms of tax and revenue collection and stuff like that, I agree with Professor Gituro. We have
That's
to.
the man who is addressing me properly, Mr. Gituro. Thank you.
We have to make it a joy to pay tax.
Absolutely. Joy.
Right? We have to make it a joy to pay tax. And it means that I, as an individual, have got to associate things happening to me with the tax that I pay. In the Nordic countries, taxes are almost 70%.
Yes.
And guys are paying, they're not complaining. But things work in that country. And you can see the impact of taxes on the lives of people. I think in reality in Kenya, we have to change the government expenditure bucket and begin to invest the taxes that we pay in things that will impact on the population. Right?
That's Keynesian, one of the points of Keynesian.
Yep. Healthcare.
Simple that.
Healthcare is something that will impact on the population. Education is something that will impact on the population. Hygiene is something that will impact on the population. Availability of affordable food is something that will impact on the population. All these things, if you look at the amount of revenue the government is raising, if there were, let me not use that I was going to use, but if they were innovative enough in terms of how that money was spent to kickstart and also fund interventions in those areas, I can assure you the minute it starts touching my life, I don't have to go and look for an academy or the group of schools or whatever it is to take my kids, and I can take them to a good school, right? Then my pocket gets lighter or heavier and heavier because I've got more spendable income. Because and that begins to now give you the fact that because I'm getting more money, you can begin to tax, right? And I'm happy with the taxing. I have a story about a taxi driver who took me from Amsterdam Airport, Schiphol, to a hotel nearby. And I remember commenting, I was here 2 years ago and this junction is now being done. Why is it being done? Said, you know, I live in this area. And we had a discussion with the local government because there were accidents happening here.
Correct.
And so they said, okay, fine, this is our money as a local authority. Where do you want us to spend it? And the community said, that's where you spend the money. And so this taxi driver could tell me where the money was being spent. Tax. Proudly. Now, that is where we need to get to. That I say I pay taxes because I'm happy.
But not the drones or whatever.
Yeah. But at this moment in time in Kenya, we cannot see the impact of the tax that we pay. And all these things that are being brought here are simply because people are trying to evade paying tax. If I had a good reason to pay tax, I would pay it willingly and happily. Because I can tell my kids and everybody else, you see, that's where my tax is working.
Right.
A dirty market where people are not able to operate properly. The tax should be making that market good so they can operate. And the taxes, if that market was good and those guys could see the impact, garbage was being collected, the toilets were clean, etc., etc., that person will pay tax willingly when you ask them to pay. Yeah? And even says,
I thought about this morning. It is raining now, and I thought the person in Githurai, that market there, it's now like dancing with a pig. If you go there, the way it's looking right now. But if I can see that market next day, I have the less room if I want to. There's a way I can take my where. You see, yes, our taxes are paying.
Thank you.
Are being used, and I will pay.
Right. But Professor Gituro, I need to take a short break. You need to linger, because I know today is your boardroom, and also Patrick Obatha is a meeting as well, much later. You'll linger around 15 minutes, then I'll let you go. We'll take a short break right now. We hear from the politicians so that you can tell us if the nation has been properly put in place right now.
He's a man of wisdom. Writing that was a great article.